This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. To learn more or to subscribe, visit beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew. Hey, everybody. Welcome to this Craft Brewers Conference Philadelphia 2026 live edition of the Craft Beer and Brewing podcast. Thank you all for joining us here at Union Transfer. This is kind of the first time we've done something like this big live in front of a big public audience. We've done them at private events before. And as we were thinking about doing this, we're like, well, what should we do? And like when I thought about it, this gang, Vinnie, Evan, Kelsey, as a core, those 3 podcast episodes have been downloaded 250,000 times. Like when we look at the Apple data, like you look at the completion rate, and 100% would mean everyone who downloaded it listened to the entire episode. The completion rate for that first episode is 150%, meaning the average is people listening to it more than once. Absolutely insane. Thank you all for listening to it. And so we figured if we're going to do this here live at CBC, we should pull it all together. We've added for the first half a special guest who has been on the podcast more than one time, Ben Edmonds from Breakside.
That's my friend.
Welcome back, Ben. Of course, you all know Kelsey McNair, North Park. You all know Evan Price from Green Cheek.
Hey, pallies.
And you may be new to all y'all, but this is Vinnie Cilurzo of Russian River.
Hello.
We're going to do this podcast in 2 halves. The first half is going to be this crew, and then on the second half, we're going to take a little intermission and beer break because, we got folks sitting down here, and we don't want you to be thirsty for the second half of the podcast. So we'll take a little break, about 45 minutes in, and then come back on, and then joining us for the second half is going to be Dr. Tom Shellhammer, who is going to get very nerdy with us. Yep, it's going to be awesome. And of course, at the end of each of these halves, we're going to try to set out about 10 minutes at the end for some questions. We got a mic right there in the middle of the audience. I can't see it very well right now because of these lights, but there you go, right? It's going to be up there. So as we get closer to that, I'll give you some prompts. If any of you all have questions for this illustrious crew up here, definitely grab a space at the mic, get ready, and we'll try to field as many questions as we can. We want to thank Encompass for supporting this live podcast. If you're a producer trying to get better visibility into how your products are performing at retail, there's a better way, and it's officially in Orbit. Orbit gives BevAlc producers real-time depletion, shipment, and inventory data alongside a CRM built for managing distributor relationships in the field. No more week-old data, no more chasing distributors over email. If you're here live in person at the Craft Brewers Conference, stop by Encompass at booth 1457 to see Orbit in action. Scan the QR code up here on the slides or over at their table out here in the lobby for your chance to win a free year of Orbit. And please do that when we break. Go over there, sign up for it, and we will announce the winner of a free year of Orbit here at the end of the podcast. Also, we want to thank Yakima Valley Hops. YakimaValleyHops.com is your direct source for the finest hops and innovative hop products. Top varieties like Citra, Mosaic, Galaxy, and more are available in just a couple clicks whenever you need them. No contracts required, fast fulfillment, reliable service, consistent supply. Discover how easy hop sourcing can be at YakimaValleyHops.com, a John I. Haas company. If you're here in Philly, visit them in the John I. Haas booth 1127 for great beer, rad merch, free samples, and exceptional high fives. And be sure to experience both the Euphorix line designed for cold side editions and the Lupo Core line of next generation hop pellets. We'd also like to thank our sponsors, Triple Seat and Pack Tech, for their support in bringing this here to you live in Philly. Have you guys enjoyed the Russian River beer that we brought in on tap? Some good stuff there, some good stuff. So let's get the conversation going here. And again, if you've got questions in about 30 minutes, line up right there at the mic. Vinnie, as we were thinking about what we wanted to talk about through the podcast today, you had some very clear ideas.
Yeah, so I have communicated with all three of these guys, some more recent than others, on the topic of sulfur, but specifically from dry hopping. And that's something that Jamie and I we communicate quite a bit, and it's something that I just thought might be a really interesting topic. And we also had Tom Shellhammer out visiting us last summer, and he and his partner spent the weekend with Natalie and I. But that Friday before, he spent a day with us, and I think we spent a good hour in our conference room talking about dry hopping sulfur. So that's how this came to be. In the early days of Pliny the Elder, it was dry hopped with CTZ. It's no longer that way, but so we've always had this kind of love-hate relationship with sulfur, and these guys are all shaking their heads like, yeah, us too. And we were just backstage talking about this. And really, we always just blamed it on the CTZ. And then we started using some early harvest CTZ from our friends at Siegel, and it was grown specifically for breweries that are using it for dry hopping. And although it was better, we still had sulfur, and we started pinpointing it to some of the Simcoe lots, and that farm really cleaned up their act. And so little by little, we kept cleaning it up. But the fact of the matter is we still saw it being very inconsistent. And got to COVID times, and we decided to try this process that we coined quick crash dry hop, and we trademarked it, so don't try to trademark it. No, although you really don't want to trademark it anytime you hear the end of my story. But the idea, at the time we were having a lot of hop creep issues, and so the idea was based on one of Tom Shellhammer's former students, Peter Wolf. He had done some work that basically said if you can get everything out of the hops in 24 to 36 hours if you mix the beer and the hops, so on and so forth. And so we were basically going to try that, and basically we're going to try to beat hop creep from even starting. And we actually were successful on that end, but the flip side is we saw a ton of sulfur and a ton of aldehydes, like acid aldehydes, so like pumpkin innards and melon, that sort of thing, but a lot of sulfur. And so although that wasn't successful, we did learn that there is such a thing as dry hopping like too fast, and that you do need some contact time to blow off the sulfur. And then fast forward to the last 9-10 months, some of you may know that we put in CO2 recovery, and we started seeing, we were collecting as much CO2 as we can. It became kind of a game within the brewery. And we were even collecting the CO2 off the hop creep secondary fermentations, and we were smelling sulfur in the CO2 that we were collecting, and we can isolate a tank down to one specific collector, and we were bubbling that into water, doing a sampling, and there was CO2 in the sulfur, and
this
it's
is
changed.
sulfur dioxide, just to be clear?
We're just talking general sulfur, because it's really, you've got two different types of mercaptans. There's H2S, there's SO2, we were talking backstage of dimethyl sulfite and trimethyl, and anyways, so it then was in our CO2 supply, and it really changed the way that we're looking at how we collect CO2, but also capping the tank or not to cap the tank. So it's probably a good place to start. So our process now is that we collect CO2 off the primary fermentations, but once the hops go in, we actually let it bubble into a bucket or at 0 atmosphere for 2 or 3 days before we start bunging the tank, putting pressure on it, pushing the hops out and trying to get it out of the beer. But so the next time I see you, I want to hear from you if you're a team cap or if you're a team vent on your dry hop. So
How do you think about that, Evan?
There's a frog in my throat. Hi. For us at Green Cheek, we go through primary fermentation. We give it about 24 hours to clean up after harvesting the yeast out.
When you say primary fermentation, is there a difference in this primary fermentation whether you are brewing an IPA with a lager yeast or with an ale yeast?
It does change for us for ale versus lager for sure. We don't have a CO2 recovery system, and so in both examples we're team vent in just obviously primary, and then for lager that tank that primary fermentation usually is a 24-hour, maybe 48-hour longer, depending on if it's West Coast Pils or something like a cold IPA. The 24-hour lag for us is something that maybe has been the last year, where we are just trying to get a little bit more yeast out of suspension before we then go in for our dry hop. We're throwing all the hops in at that point. We're putting 15 pounds of pressure on the tank. We're then allowing that to sit for 2 hours. We're then venting the tank. And one of the interesting things that we saw with what this is, Vinnie mentioned that he tried out this dry hop technique, and he's probably going to touch on that at some point. But we ended up putting a glass dry hop port on whenever we did this 15 PSI thing. And what was interesting is the hop stayed on top whenever we still had the pressure on it. And it wasn't until that we started venting it after the whole process that hops then, some kind of turbulence or something like that took place to then get these hops from floating on the top of the beer in our experience. And so that was pretty fun. From there, we're allowing it to vent for say, anywhere from 48 to 72 hours. Typically, it's a 72-hour dry hop. Sometimes, rarely, we're adding hops 1 or 2 days apart, but typically, all hops go in at once.
And that's just 15 PSI for like an hour or two, isn't it?
Yeah.
And are you purging CO2 through the bottom of the cone?
No, nothing there.
That's gonna be relevant here in a minute.
Cool.
When I tell a story.
I can't wait. I can't wait. The amount of things you can learn from this guy. Kelsey, talk to me about your technique, Pally.
My technique? Okay. It's not entirely dissimilar through a lot of the stuff that Evan's doing. We do a multi-stage dry hop on virtually any dry hop beer that we have, with the exception of our West Coast Pils. Those typically get a single stage dry hop. But for like a West Coast IPA or a hazy, we, on the day that we get like a big pull of yeast, like when we're able to harvest for repitching, that's when we'll, get as much yeast out of the tank as possible. And then we'll come in, and virtually everything gets a minor temperature boost toward the end of what we call primary fermentation. So we'll pitch usually lower than set point once it gets to set point, and then we've got, about 20%, 20-25% of the remaining desired attenuation left. We'll give it a boost, by about 3 degrees Fahrenheit. And so we do dry hop at these warmer ends of the spectrum. And so the first dry hop that we usually introduce will be a concentrated pellet. And we do that just so that we're not having as much of a vegetal interaction during a phase of dry hopping when there's still a decent amount of yeast, present in solution. So trying to avoid some of those polyphenols and likely some vegetal sorts of flavors that could happen that would be sulfury. And then the following day, and we continue to, shave the tank, drop yeast, whatever yeast is sitting in the cone, we're getting it out of the tank. And then, we'll do our, if it's a double dry hop beer, that's when it gets, a pretty hefty charge, the bulk of the dry hops, and that's going to be mostly T90s, sometimes a mix of cryo and T90. But, at no point do we cap the tank. We're definitely team vent for any ale yeast fermentation. And a lot of these beers will also incorporate a recirculation. So, some of these concerns about maybe, you've got the hop lily pad sitting on top tends to be dealt with through that process of just, recirculating the beer. And, over time, we've continued to develop that process. And, we've gone to virtually as short of a recirculation as possible. So we're just paying attention to, the sight glass on our recirculation loop, and we're coming some of our tanks have a tangential offset poured up top, so we're coming out of the bottom and going into the top and getting this nice whirlpool. Some of our tanks have a direct shot in, so in those cases, we'll usually pull out of the top of the tank and come back in through the bottom.
Any pressure on the tank?
During the recirc, that is the one time that it is capped, but we're talking like 1 psi, 2 psi, like very, very minimal. Yeah, and the recirc could be very brief. We're just looking for visual turbidity, hops mixed into solution, and that's all we want. The longer we go, the more vegetal sort of characters we can end up with, and something we're just very aware of and try to avoid. Yeah, and then we'll cap and crash. When we're at about 72 hours on our main dry hop load, we like to try and get the beer crashed out in about 10 days, but we're always validating, through sensory VDK checks and making sure that there's also no acetaldehyde present. Yeah, and we're just, trying to keep the beer as clean as we can, but also get it cold as quickly as is reasonably possible.
How about you, Ben?
I think there's two kind of lanes here for us. One is that historically, if you're looking at beers like ours, like Breaks IPA and Wanderlust, our main production beers, where we are less likely to do kind of random trials. We do some random trials, but those are going to be vented the entire time, 2 dry hops, kept open between, roused if needed, but pretty much team vent the entire time. And a lot of that we backed into because of hop creep, right? The goal was to reduce tank time, and if we were finding, we were capping tanks earlier, we were ending up in a situation where we were prolonging hop creep, risking diacetyl in finished beer, things like that. So it wasn't necessarily based on we think the hop character is better because we are venting. It was to avoid creep-related issues, which were less desirable, right? Sure. I don't care. You can have the best hop aroma in the world, but if you have diacetyl in the finished beer, you've got diacetyl in the finished beer, sorry. That said, in the last year, one of my pet interests has mainly been working on different cellar regimes for this. I think we have a lot better control of our creep now, and some of these things have involved bringing variables like capping back into effect. So a lot of the more kind of one-off prestige IPAs that we make now are capped earlier, and I would just also propose, since we've been talking about kind of team vent versus team cap, I'm going to add 2 additional dimensions into Vinnie's kind of framework here, which is that I think you have to talk about those 2 things you have to talk about that in conjunction with temperature and contact time. You can't isolate one of those variables and only look at that. You have to look at all 3.
Sure.
Yeah.
How did those variables interplay for you, Vinnie?
Yeah, the part that Evan mentioned about 15 psi, using top pressure, he talked about it on one of the IPA craft beer and brewing episodes that we were on. And I remember being on a text thread with Kelsey, I think it was Matt Brenelson was on there, and we were like, Evan's full of crap. That doesn't really work. And even Matt, he's pretty smart with hops. And he's like, yeah, I don't know. So anyways, I decided to buy sight glass dry hop ports, just like he mentioned. And we spent 8-9 months in the pilot brewery testing this. And so it ties in with what Ben says of contact time and getting the hops out and temperature. So we are dry hopping at 68, but we started testing exactly what Evan had proposed. And with the sight glass, you could see, and what we learned was that it's not just adding the hops, it's jacking CO2 through, mixing, whatever it is, you need to get your hops saturated. Yeah. And once they're saturated with 15 psi, they'll start falling. You can literally control when and how you get your hops to settle out. And a lot of this ties in with the sulfur we're talking about, because if you leave it on the hops, if you leave the beer on the hops too long, the hops in your tank too long, you're going to start extracting too much sulfur, which Ben and I were just texting about this or emailing about this just a week or 2 back. And so literally you could see the hops with 15 psi, if you waited there long enough with a flashlight, you could see them just start settling, and within like an hour, there wasn't that lily pad on the top that Kelsey mentioned, and so it proved that what he had proposed on that one podcast worked, and
Well, and one thing to add here, I mean, I don't know if I addressed or I talked about that was really where this all started was when I kept making these beers where I wasn't doing the PSI thing. What we used to do is we would dry hop the beer, we would just let it be, we would let it vent, and there would be this certain amount of tank time. I want to say back then it was still the 72-hour spot that I'm in now, and I was so convinced that this hop lily pad that sat on the top that would kind of slowly like drift through the beer was maybe the best possible approach. But on the other hand, what would end up happening is I would get this variable situation where I would end up with these beers that were super dank. And what was happening there is there would still apparently somehow still be hops sitting on the top of the tank at the 72-hour mark. I would then go to crash the beer, and then what I would be getting is this cold contact time with these hops for the first time, and all I would be getting is this onion garlic character that never got in contact with yeast while it was warm, and this expression, instead of having like that, there's a good cannabis character that I think, is something that us California guys are looking for. And there, on the other hand, is like onion, garlic, turds, and I don't want that. And so I think that it's like, once, I remember talking to, I think it was Tim from Cellar Maker, his technique was pretty crazy at the time, where he was like, I want those hops to be mixed in with the beer as soon as possible. And so he would be agitating the bottom of the tank and dry hopping at the same time in order to get those mixed in as soon as possible, which I think is absolutely the thing that you want to do. Trying to figure out, because there's trade-offs in every part of this that we're doing as brewers, the moment you change one thing, the domino effect to another thing, right? And so so his beers for me at the time, I was just always just like, how do you get such a great hop character? And so I think that just getting those hops mixed in matters.
And I will say, just to validate what Evan said, after we get the hops saturated, it's 15 psi, they push down if we haven't dumped the cone yet. If we release the pressure within an hour or two, the lily pad's back on the top. The hops come back up again. That 15 psi is so important to push the hops into the cone, to allow you to dump the cone, and then it ties in with what Ben was saying about getting hop creep, hopefully slowed down just by getting the hops out of the tank. And you have a theory, or your approach is to get the hops out quickly too, and yeast and all that we were just...
Yeah, we're generally relatively short contact. I mean, I think actually all four of us, having collaborated with everyone on the last couple of years, like we're all kind of in this like 48 to 72 hour zone. But so I want to push back on Evan here for a second on that last bit.
No.
I think that you are as the special guest and outside the gang here. I think you are the sulfuriest boy at the table. I think that Vinnie and especially Kelsey are very and push back on this, guys. Like, I think you two are you view the sulfide compounds in your beers as fundamental kind of negatives. Vinnie, you tell the story about trying to avoid them. Kelsey and I, you have talked about hop selection on this. And Evan, I think you like to dabble in the dark arts a little bit more.
The dark arts.
Yeah. Which is to pull the sulfur lever.
No. Now, just to be clear here, you're talking about like jumping into a little bit of OG.
Correct. Well, and I think OG is one bucket.
Okay.
I think we should think about sulfur. And again, like, we're not talking about SO2 and H2S, right? We're talking about, when they're positive, we call them thiols. When they're negative, we call them mercaptans. But that's like the same compound, y'all. And it's basically like, we are talking about hop-derived, naturally occurring compounds. And I think, a few buckets. This is how I think of it. We have the OG bucket. We have a slightly more diesel, musky, sweaty New Zealand bucket, right?
I love that bucket.
Or firecracker. Something
Sorry,
if you're
Brent.
talking rough bucket. I love that bucket.
I see you in the second row.
I love that bucket.
I would actually, I don't want to derail this here onto like New Zealand hops, but there is a pure tropical file bucket, right? There's the earthy Caddy Simcoe Idaho 7 bucket, and then there's maybe that's probably all of them, unless I'm forgetting one. But those are kind of the ones we're talking. So there's the cannabis and then there's the OG, which I think we should distinguish too.
Yeah.
But I think that's the lever that gets pulled. You might be pulling one or more of different ones of those based on your preferences around certain varietals. But then I think there are prettier beers. And I think Kelsey McNair is the king of prettier beers that are the most intense, that is to avoid the sulfur question. So I think, but it's an interesting, it's how much do you like it?
Now, just to be clear, which bucket am I in?
You don't have to just be in one bucket. It's it's a continuum.
Well, I'm the sulfury boy. I just want to make sure I'm in maybe hopefully the
You're
right
the
sulfury
sulfuriest boy at the table that's not me or Jamie.
How do the individual hops that you choose or select influence some of the technique and process potentially, or how you then work through that process to shape some of that? Is there some difference in how you handle dry hopping depending on what that hop variety is and what that individual variety or group of varieties can produce for you?
Let's see. I'm usually looking at interplay between, different hops, and then the timing of them is not too big of a decision that I make. One example, I like in a hazy IPA, some, Galaxy adds a nice nuance. It adds some notes, but if I add my Galaxy really early, I get all this grass that I just can't stand. So my contact time on a hop like that, I want it to be really short. It's that's going to go in on the day probably before we crash it. Let's not have that in the tank for too long. But I'm trying to think of other hops that just get away from you when they've been in the tank, even when you're doing these pretty short dry hop charges that are 48, 72 hours. There's not much where I'm just oh, that one just really can't be in the tank for more than X amount of time. I haven't found a whole lot of that. Yeah. So maybe if we're going back to CTZ or something like that, or I can think of some maybe higher old school cohumulone types of varieties that.
Chinook.
Yeah, Chinook was where I was trying to get to. Yeah, I think there's considerations to be made for certain hop varieties like that. But if I'm thinking about all the usual suspects, your Mosaic and Simcoe Citra and Crush Cryo. Crush T90 is one that I would say is a hop that I generally don't even want to use. I don't like a lot of what comes with that hop in a T90, but I absolutely love Crush Cryo.
Yeah, Crush Cryo.
Yeah, Crush Cryo is amazing. So that's one where, just trying it out and seeing the difference of those two things, I could see where I was getting all this, woody character that I really disliked in the T90, but, in the Cryo was beautiful, all just red berries and bright and punchy.
We did a collaboration with Highland Park earlier this year, and it's probably the best collaboration we've ever done. Nothing against. It wasn't even about the beer. It was the exercise leading up to the beer, and it was about the education, the sharing of information that we all do. But there's a brewery, and it led me to this thing that I learned about them that goes back to your question. They select for the most punchy and big flavored, some dank, and we're Natalie and I are selecting fully against that. And yet their beers are as pretty as North Park. It must be that your brewery needs to have park in its name, Highland Park, North Park, because their beers are like, they have that super bright, clean, aromatic. And what I learned the most from that collaboration was doing sulfur sensory. There are these companies that you can buy these sulfur sensory kits, and now we're doing it, and Natalie and I have done it a few times over the last couple months, and it's super educational. And we did it at Highland Park, and it was impressive how good their team was at picking out different sulfurs, H2S, SO2, 2 different types of mercaptans, so on and so forth, and all just from practice. And they're a small brewery, and they have a simple but validating lab program, yeast, oxygen, that sort of thing, but they don't really have much else. But they have sulfur licked, and a lot of it is because they're using lager yeast, and it was kind of forced them to learn it. But it was really impressive to see that. And so for the brewers in the room that think like, well, I don't know how I can figure out all the sulfur stuff, Highland Park is a great example that they just spent some money on sulfur test kits and sensory, and their beers are ultra clean, and I think all of us agree they're some of the best beers around. So,
Ben, did you have some thoughts on specific hops and the way that the sulfur expresses in those, and even like how you may choose to blend some of those in a way that then either wouldn't blend because they might create clashing kind of flavor compounds, or that work really nicely to complement each other with some of these buckets of sulfurs that you're defined?
I think that for us, I'm kind of in Kelsey's camp on this. I don't think it's about maybe with the exception of something like Galaxy or a Crush T90, where you get some woody and grassier notes that are kind of unwelcome in a modern West Coast IPA or West Coast Pils. I don't worry as much about the varietals anymore. And part of that's how we select, right? We're not doing the Highland Park select for the dankest, the most intense thing on the table. It's a prettier hop that we're looking for. But I think we can pull the other levers, the pressure, the contact time, the temperature, when we're shaving the cone, things like that, how long the beer is in a fermenter, hot versus crashed, those types of variables, and affect additional sulfur to a level that we like. We're doing a trial right now where we're looking at what I'm gonna call no cap, and 6, 7.
The kids are loving this, yes. No cap.
And short contact, long contact, 3 days versus 7 days. And the interest there is what's the difference in the exact same set of varietals when you cap the beer, don't cap the beer, leave it for 3 days before you start shaving the cone versus a few more days, 6 days, 7 days before you shave the cone. And where is the line between pleasant and unpleasant additional mercaptan? Where do you get some grunge that amplifies intensity, that brings the beer higher? And we don't have the sensory data on this yet. So we're running 2 lanes. One is just pure hedonics that is part of our normal sensory program. These are others like a kata, like a choose all that apply, to see where people are flagging particular mercaptan related flavors, broccoli, cabbage, things like that. And actually Matt, who's in the audience tonight, one of our brewers out there, he's probably the most sensitive to some of these mercaptans in IPAs on our team. And so it's funny because we have some people who really like the grunge, and then some of these beers we'll put in front of Matt and be like, this is the grossest vegetable I've ever had,
It's always amazing that and you said this in an email or text to me recently, you're like, we're always doing the same experiments at the same time.
For completely, we backed into it in completely different ways, yeah.
And one of the things we're doing is we're sending samples off to a lab in Napa that's doing sulfur they can test for 6 or 7 different of these sub-sulfur compounds. And it's interesting to see it pre-dry hop and post-dry hop, and how actually some of the sulfur subcategories drop, but the ones we're talking about here go up with the more hops you add. So you go from 2 pounds per barrel to 3 to 4 to 5 pounds per barrel, you're going to get more hops. And yes, we have run Elder Foo, we ran our our Highland Park collab, and those are typically higher dry hop loads than we typically see, and they were higher in some of these sulfur compounds. So.
Can we roll back? I think one thing that might be useful, like that, I'm interested to hear your guys' perspective on this, is like, Vinnie, you kind of positioned this interestingly. It's like 10 years ago, 15 years ago, you were thinking about sulfur in IPA within the like kind of context of Columbus, right? Why is it now? What do you guys think? I have like in my mind a list of kind of things that have kind of emerged as trends and processes in IPA that have changed in the last 15 years. But why is sulfur now like such a big thing?
I think for us, at Russian River, you answered it, was that we're using process to pick up sulfur the right amount rather than relying on hops to do it. Yeah. And so we're going in trying to select pretty clean hops, and then we're going to pull levers on contact time, that sort of thing, just like you're doing right now.
I want to ask you a question about that, because you mentioned you're not selecting for the grungiest or the most intense.
Kelsey's especially on this.
Well,
like,
I've talked to these guys about this. So this is your special segment, Ben. So we got to use you while you're here. So I want to, like, if you aren't selecting for the most pungent or the most intense, I want to tell me how you do select. But I also want to mention we're going to start taking some questions here in 2 or 3 minutes. So if anyone has a question, jump up there to the mic and we'll go to you if we do have questions out there. And don't be afraid to do it, because we would love to get your questions in here too. And the mic is right there. But maybe answer that one for me first.
Well, and just to be clear, intensity does matter on the table for us for selection. That's a huge thing. Like would tell anyone who is coming to hop selection with the break side in Yakima, I say intensity matters first. Like if a pretty quiet lot is not what we're going to select. But just because something is the most intense, if it has some of these more intense sulfur edges, we're not going to choose that because it's a little bit louder than a very intense, pretty fruit-forward lot. So I think that's kind of our MO, is like trying to find that balance there, because we don't have to have it in the raw material, but intensity has to be in the raw material. And what I want in the raw material, I think similar to Kelsey, is as much fruit as possible.
And then there's the sampling between samples that are put in front of you, and then there's the actual data that we are seeing more and more of, and more brewers that I'm talking to now are trying to triangulate between that actual compound data and that physical rub to understand, it's not just this one or this one. If none of those are actually reaching that kind of threshold that you're looking for, then picking the most intense on the table is maybe not necessarily going to do you the right. Are you playing in that direction too?
Yeah, I mean, yes, it's not like default to most intense if nothing is that pleasing. It's have a better conversation with the supplier kind of thing.
Yeah, because total oils could be total oils that it's, what did you say about thiols, or what we call good?
When it's positive, we call them thiols. When they're negative, we call them mercaptans.
Bam.
So.
Yeah.
All right, so we have some folks out here for questions. Can we throw a light up on them? Oh, all right.
Whoa.
See, it's like magic here. Magic here at Union Transfer. Tell me who you are, and then give us your question.
Hey, I'm Morgan, and I want to go back to what Vinnie had said earlier about the reappearing lily pad. I thought that was incredibly interesting. I would hazard a guess that if you release all the pressure and the lily pad comes back, wouldn't that mean that the hops aren't fully saturated? That they're floating and they're not fully wortified, or like
beerified?
Beerified?
Yeah, liquefied?
Yeah,
it probably is the case that they're not fully saturated yet, and so that they can float again, but it also is differential pressure probably between the head pressure of the CO2 versus the beer and whatnot. But and this is all anecdotal, us just looking at it, visually seeing it. But I guess my point is that Evan's process of the 15 psi, it really does work. But hop saturation is the kind of foundational point. And if you don't saturate them, whether it's bubbling CO2 or recircing or whatever, then you end up with what he talked about how once you release the pressure, then there is a little bit of mixing because it causes some of the hops to actually go into the beer. It's actually quite interesting. It's a bit of an investment to buy these sight glass. We bought one for each of our 4 fermenters in the pilot brewery, but it's been instrumental and we now apply this in the big brewery now too. So I should pay you some sort of patent fee or whatever.
I'll take my Pliny the Younger royalties, please. That's the only way I like my payment.
But more recently, we've tested mixing the hops, making a slurry in a separate tank, and then pumping those into the fermenter. And there we see less of a lily pad anytime because the hops are truly saturated, to your point. So
That sounds pretty awesome.
Awesome. Thank you.
Oh, great. Just tell us who you are and then share your question.
My name is Brett. I'm from Girdwood Brewing in Alaska. Kind of to follow up on that point, actually. So our current process, similar, I guess. We're dry hopping, putting it at 5 psi for about 24 hours, then increasing it to 15 psi, and then basically shaving, dumping those hops another 24 hours later. And we tend to notice we get a pretty good dump of those hops. We're not doing a recirc. We're not seeing that it's recirculating, but just based on the fact that we're getting a pretty good dump out of there, I feel like we're getting a good mixing. But I guess my question was when your hop contact time, is that 15 ps after the 15 psi recirc? You were saying you do it for 24 hours. And then kind of to pair onto that, I've seen some research with Sapporo did back in the day that they were dry hopping basically at cold crash temperature for 24 hours and feeling like they got all of the aroma or whatever they needed, which obviously maybe wasn't an IPA, but how do you maybe feel about that or think about that?
Yeah. So years ago at World Beer Cup or CBC, New Belgium did this presentation on the presence of yeast with hops, and it changed my mind for a long time now, still to this day, on how I look at this. But there was this side-by-side that they did where they centrifuged a tank and had a bright beer in one tank. And then they had a beer, on the other hand, with yeast stone suspension. They dry hop both. And just the amount of onion garlic character that they got in the beer with no yeast was significantly more than the other. And they felt like the yeast scrubbed and biotransformed, for lack of a better word, the onion and garlic out of the tank. And so, leaving you with some fruit and a range of other things from the hops. But to just go back over that dry hopping technique, it's just 2 hours that we're keeping it for 15 psi, and then from there we're going right back to venting the tank, and it's a total of 72 hours for dry hop time, and then we're crashing the tank with ALDC.
Yeah, sorry. So you're basically forcing the hops through after that 2 hours. And
Yep.
then you're good. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
And real quick, the Aroxa and Flavor Active are the 2 companies that I can remember off the top of my head, the sulfur, that have the sulfur sensory kits that we use.
Those sensory kits from Rocks are very good.
Yeah.
They paid me to say that.
I'm Bobby. I brew at Sound and Fury Brewing in Brooklyn, New York. As an East Coast brewer, I feel like a lot of people that I know on the East Coast dry hop at between 40 and 58 degrees. But I feel like all the West Coast people that I know or hearing you guys talk, you're always dry hopping 65, 70 degrees. Have you guys tried lower and you like higher for a reason, or just, I guess, what's the thought behind that?
I think we like dry beer. And so, I don't know if it's the hot weather. I don't exactly know what happened to most of us West Coast brewers, but when we, no offense, East Coast brewers, but when we come to the East Coast, we're just searching for a dry beer anywhere, and there's just so much residual sugar. And so,
I do agree with that.
but Yeah, but the other thing for me, at least, and I think maybe everyone else would speak to the same thing because we're all on a similar page for how we do this. But the character that we all get from a warmer dry hop is something that I think we prefer.
Yeah, I think it's something we talked about on one of the podcasts about, like, just it was preference, not right or wrong, just that we all like for dry hopping at 68 Fahrenheit plus minus, and it is what it is. So, but doesn't mean that dry hopping cold doesn't work by any means. It's just what works.
And I think all four of us, are talking about like mainly Chico and the lager yeast beers here, right? So like if you're talking about an English yeast, like a London type yeast for a hazy IPA.
Ooh, this is a good point.
This, I think it's not so much just the temperature that the yeast or that we're dry hopping it. It's about, I think Evan made this point, that it's about the amount of yeast that's in suspension. And with Chico, as soon as you crash it to like 60, and it's a great way to arrest hop creep, you're going to drop that. There may be some other risks in that, but like you are really not getting any of the residual biotransformative effects that might be positive to evolve out aldehydes and unwanted mercaptans, but you might, with a different yeast, have a very different yeast hop kind of matrix at that point.
Cool.
That is all the questions we have time for, but we are going to do another segment of questions at the end of the second half. We're going to take a little break here, maybe 20 minutes, so you can go out and visit all of our sponsored tables. Go enter the competition and win a free year of Orbit from Encompass.
Whoa.
Go visit our Yakima Valley Hops, John I. Haas table and check out what they've got. Pack Tech, Triple Seat. Grab another beer. We will be back. And also, thank you to Ben, because Ben will be drinking beer for the rest of the night.
Ben Edmonds.
Tom Shellhammer is going to join us for the second half. We've got a special bit to start that off. We'll be back in about 20 minutes. Cheers, y'all. We are going to kick off this second half of the podcast here live at Union Transfer in Philadelphia, CBC 2026, with a special bit that we have never done on the podcast before. But, this one was inspired by Vinny. We have this little thing in the magazine called Pick Six. You guys read Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine, right? Yeah. So we have this story that we run in every issue of Craft Beer and Brewing called Pick Six, and it's been there since issue number 1, where we love to track back the spheres of influence, those beers that were important, made by other brewers that have influenced brewers, those things that, just to track back these great beers that have just had this influence on other brewers. And this guy to my left, it's your favorite segment in the magazine, Vinny.
Absolutely. Yeah. In fact, the very first time Jamie interviewed me, it was in my office at our Windsor facility. And he didn't know this, but up in my office, I have a framed poster of my Pick Six. And I remember Jamie taking a picture of it. I had asked him to send me the artwork, and I blew it up, framed it. Anyway, so that was the idea. We're like, who could be a great second guest and that's never done the Pick Six? And have you ever had a non-brewer?
We haven't. And we will have to, at some point in the future, tap Tom for his top 6 academic papers. I'd actually asked Scott Janish about doing a Pick Six. He's like, I don't know if I can give you 6 beers, but I can give you 6 things to read, and I think that,
Wow.
Anyway, we don't want to steal that thunder, but you're
for
going to
another night.
All right, so
Yes.
Tom, 6 beers, you get 1 minute. I'm actually not going to time it.
No.
I'm not going to pull out
exactly.
the stopwatch, but
I don't mind.
I want to
Yeah,
hear.
there you go.
I want to get your 6 beers. It can be from anywhere around the world. The beauty of the Pick Six is that it's not just the 6 beers. It's the story that the brewer gets to write in Craft Beer and Brewing and why it inspired them to add it to the list, and somehow probably touches the beers that the particular brewer makes.
Yeah.
You ready?
I'm ready. Yeah, exactly. So when you asked me to do this, that's like, okay, this is kind of an interesting exercise in thinking about not just what your favorite beers are, but like your favorite beer experiences as well. And
Absolutely.
So,
we'll go.
the
Let's do
first
it.
one. The first one is Sierra Nevada Pale Ale. That is like you're hearing kind of the pantheon of the Tom Shellhammers. Well, a bunch of these are the pantheon. There's a few in here that are not part of the pantheon, but it's one that is like important because it was just like formative. Like at a time when craft beer was just starting in my life, it was like there was like the mass big yellow beers. I think San Miguel was like an import, and then there were like these new guys, and Sierra Nevada was one of those. I remember as a student taking a trip to Sierra Nevada back when they were in the garage, like with the dairy tanks. And so that beer has been there as like kind of a beacon of like what could be. It's also just damn good beer. So that's number one.
That was on my pick 6.
Yep.
Wait, you had the beer when they were still brewing it out of the garage?
Yes, exactly.
Okay, that in itself is wild.
It's really cool. And I was like, this is craft beer? Wow, okay, this
You
is
must,
interesting.
but you must have had your finger on the pulse. Like, how did you come about that beer in that?
Evan, we've got 1 minute per beer.
Yeah,
No, but this
okay.
is such an
I know how much you
interesting
like to talk,
story,
so,
Jamie.
yeah.
Oh, I was going to hit you with that one.
Exactly. We can do this with each one of these.
All right,
Okay,
number
let's see.
2.
Number 2. Number 2 is Orval. Orval is definitely in my pantheon. And the reason why it's there, not only is it just an amazing beer, is that, I mean, I had Orval before, but when I spent a year in Germany on a sabbatical, and part of that trip was just to explore Europe. And so I was at Orval. It was actually Guy Dederlinks was showing me around the grounds, and I met Jean-Marie Rock, and so we were just toured around the brewery. We went upstairs to his office, and he had like Orval on draft. And he was like, okay, this is the only place in the world you have Orval on draft. This is a bottle conditioned beer. And so we had this delicious Orval, and I was like, wow, this is kind of like, this is no disrespect to Orval, but this is kind of like American, almost craft beer, right? It's like, it's British inspired with specialty malts. There's no Brett character in when it's on draft. And so we had this, wonderful experience, and then we went out and had smoked trout at this little restaurant, and it was just like, one of these magical experiences that I'll never forget. I mean, it's just one of my favorite beers, but that experience like kicks it up a notch.
We're 2 for 2 because Orval was on my list too. Natalie and I have had that draft Orval multiple times with Jean-Marie Rock.
So, okay.
And for years there was an empty bottle of Sanctification, our 100% Brett beer, behind the tap there, which was very cool to see.
Yeah.
So,
Just
anyways,
rubbing it in.
Number 3.
Okay, number 3. So back to the same thing around like spending this year in Berlin. This is 2008, 2009, my first sabbatical. My focus was like get to Europe, understand, like get inside what the European brewers, and I was in Berlin, and so it was like get inside what German brewers are, and so it was complete study in yellow beer, which was really, really quite cool to not just be having to import, but this is what you drank day to day to day. And so two experiences came out of that. One is like Augustiner Helles.
God.
Yeah, that's like, and having that, particularly at a beer garden called Zollpackhof. It's right across from the Bundeskanzleramt, which is like the German chancellery. So you can look across the river at where then Angela Merkel would be taking her walks. And so it's like, beautiful beer, beautiful setting. It's like quintessential German beer experience. And then after like several months of like really understanding German beer, like understanding like there's a whole long list of like pilsners, but I would say one in there that just stood out from like an experience that my wife and I were having was the Radeberger Pils. It was just like this sublime, beautiful blend of like hop aroma, right kind of balance. It was like Pils perfection at that time. There's plenty of other German Pils that I would put in this same category as well, but this is the one that I'm coming up with.
So is that 2 beers then?
2 beers.
That was 3 and 4.
That was 3 and 4.
Bam.
Yeah, we're in the old
you
beers.
did it in a minute too.
Mhm. Yeah, okay.
But that's
so then,
okay because that's the time that Evan took. So now we're still on track.
I'm catching up here.
Yeah.
Exactly.
All right.
Okay, and
Next
then
one.
number 5, Timothy Taylor's Landlord. Okay,
Oh.
yeah. So this is like another experience. One of these exists as time and place.
Did you visit the brewery?
I have not visited the brewery. That's on my list.
Can I tell you my story of visiting the brewery?
No, you can't.
No. So I spent many years on the IBD Board of Examiners, and so I got to know like other examiners. It's part of the same experience we went to Germany. So Ian Bear Park was one of these examiners. He lived in Leeds. He had worked at many breweries in Northern England, so I went and visited Ian. And we were at his pub in his little town, and we were sitting across the bar, and the barkeep was Craig. And Craig was, and I couldn't understand a thing what this guy was saying. Northern England, it was just like this, he was speaking English, and so, Ian looks at me, do you understand this? And I'm like, maybe 20%. And at some point, Craig pushes a Timothy Taylor landlord across the across the bar, and it was just like, what the heck? What happened here? It was like this. Again, this is sort of quintessential. If you're going to put, like, to me, British beer like icon, this would be one of those ones. It's like this amazing, jammy, like, beautiful beer. So that's number 5.
Great. And the 6th.
And the 6th beer. And this is like, Vinnie, you make awesome beer. So this is part to you, but also I've spent the last 2 winters in New Zealand, really getting and kind of having like a love affair with the New Zealand hop industry. This last winter was like spending 7 weeks traveling around the New Zealand hop growing region with Ron Beatston. He's the former hop breeder. So Ron and I we were kind of like, you know, Kermit the Frog and Fozzie Bear, driving around the hop fields twice a week, doing the milk run, grabbing our hop samples for this hop maturity study, which we'll talk about next year, maybe. And so Dr. Ron is like on that. It's like, I'm thinking, what is a hoppy beer that is like right now? So these are all like, the first 5 are kind of old formative beers. Like this is like right now, this is the one that is like, well, okay, because it signifies the connection I'm building with the New Zealand hop industry and certainly with Dr. Ron Beatston and the amazing stuff he did with the genetics of New Zealand hops. So there we go.
He's the Michael Jordan of New Zealand hop breeders. Yeah, that's amazing. Thank you.
Cool.
And last, then Jamie doesn't even know this is coming. So I have 2 last questions, bonus questions, but you have 30 seconds to answer both of them. Favorite old school hop variety and why, and new school, and I'm going to let you split whenever old school hop and new school hop. But
Okay, so
I mean, you're a professor in hops.
Yeah, okay.
Mostly,
So favorite old school variety is Cascade. We just do all this work in Cascade. I mean, it's there because of. I mean, the reason it's on there because, well, we do a lot of research on it. There's a lot of really cool stuff in it. It's like a mainstay. It was transformative for the craft brewing industry. It's like that. So Ken, when he went after craft, it was like Cascade was like this thing that was a definite differentiator. Which is kind of interesting that it was like developed and sold to like the big guys, like Coors was big on craft, but like who would have known that Cascade would have worked in Coors Banquet? But it's like it works great in Sierra Nevada Pale Ale, back to that number 1 on that list. Okay, New World.
Yeah, new school hop. Anything, anywhere from around the world. I don't know where the split is. We're just kind of spitballing
I don't
here.
know. Exactly, spitballing. Because this just like most recent, okay, Nectaron, right? Because I've been drinking a lot of Nectaron the last few weeks being down in New Zealand. So
Amazing, beautiful hop.
Yeah.
So cool. Thanks for entertaining
was fun.
us with
Pick
this.
6. Thank you, Tom. And
Hey,
so
welcome.
congratulations, Tom, on winning a Brewers Association Recognition Award
Thank you.
this year for all the
Yeah.
important work that you are doing to support the work that the brewers here are doing.
Congratulations. Welcome to the club.
Yeah, thank you, Vinny.
It was such a badass flex.
Oh, yep.
Yeah.
And I should note, if you would like to listen to an episode of the podcast, we recorded one with Ron Bates and Dr. Ron and Tom in New Zealand last year at Hop
Last year,
Harvest.
yeah.
And it's out there on the feed. So
Yep.
if you want to hear the 2 of them, they're, Fozzie and, oh goodness.
Kermit the Frog.
Kermit, yeah. It's it is out
good.
there.
Exactly. Who is Kermit and who is Spike?
I'm Kermit. Yeah.
I love it.
So Tom, let's what your focus is primarily research that supports the agricultural side of the hop industry, but also other elements of the beer industry in addition, not just hops.
Yep.
What are some of the big projects that you are working on right now, and some of the questions that you are trying to unlock and answer?
Oh, cool. Yeah. So like we're talking about this Kermit and Fozzie riding around New Zealand. That's a hop harvest maturity project that I'm doing with NZ Hops. We've done probably 6 years of work on hop harvest maturity with Citra and Mosaic. We've done some hop harvest maturity with Cascade. I kind of could do that early on with Dan Sharp and then also with Scott LaFontaine. And so I was kind of taking a page out of that playbook. It was like when I was in New Zealand last year, 2025, talking to hop growers, then there was like disconnect as to how hops would evolve with harvest maturity. So we're doing that. We're just basically collecting samples. So we're doing hop harvest maturity on that. Hop harvest maturity on Citra and Simcoe, looking at virus-free and non-virus-free. Does that affect harvest timing? Does it affect flavor? That's kind of one of the things we're working on.
Have you found anything interesting yet on those? Anecdotally, at least?
Anecdotally, virus-free doesn't seem to impact harvest timing as far as we can tell. And we'll stop there. Yeah, don't have enough data yet to go with that. Let's see. Dr. Cecile Chanot is a postdoc in the lab. Just finished the Boston Marathon today. She's a runner, so way to go, Cecile. We're working on hop aging. There's a huge amount of hops that are in inventory. We're trying to get a sense on how do hops age. And it's interesting. There's a varietal effect, but there are some varieties that are pretty darn bulletproof. And in fact, I had Indie Hops was talking to me about Strata, and it's like, there might actually be like a vintage element to Strata. Like people want a certain vintage year going back into inventory, which is kind of cool because I think people have thought that hops are like very, very perishable, and they are. But if packaged properly, stored properly, they're maybe not as sensitive. Now don't run with that because there are some varieties that are more, let's say, sensitive to aging than others. So that's an aging project. Hop. Wildfire smoke and its impact on hop quality. So we've been doing that for about 3 or 4 years.
Is that Cade still?
Yeah, Cade is still
that?
working on that one.
Yeah.
Exactly. So this year is kind of trying to get a sense on what's the baseline. Okay, volatile phenols from smoke are the kind of things that drive smokiness in hops. But these volatile phenols are also present in the hops themselves. We're trying to get a sense of what's the background level of volatile phenols? How much do you need to have before you really start to see an effect? And can these phenols be bound to things like sugars, kind of like if you're into biotransformation. Remember back 10 years ago, we were all into hop glycosides, terpene glycosides. Well, the phenols do the same sort of thing. So we're trying to get a sense on how much that is there. Hop biotransformation, so a lot of stuff on looking at how yeast and yeast selection and fermentation conditions can affect the release of hop-bound thiols. And then dank hops, that's kind of one of the new projects. So we published a cannabis aroma lexicon last fall, and so now we're doing a project that's going to start in the next month that is looking at how do hops and cannabis, what's the overlap from a sensory perspective, and then from a chemistry perspective, what's driving these different differences, and then trying to kind of peel back the layer of what's dank in hops. But it's interesting listening to you talk and listening to Ben talk earlier. I think cannabis and dank may not necessarily be the same thing. This is something we maybe could potentially talk about, because just because a hop smells weedy doesn't necessarily make a beer that people say this is dank.
Yeah, I don't actually necessarily prefer the word dank either, which is one of the reasons why I love using the word medical grade cannabis, or something
Cannabis.
along the good shit. And so it's one of these things that when you smell it,
Yeah, it's like pornography, right? You don't need to have a definition, but you know it when you see it, kind of thing.
Oh my God.
Yeah. It's wasn't that back in there was some,
The Ed Meese Commission.
Yes, exactly.
That's
right.
going to date me if
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Right. And so Tom just said that. But it's that.
Tom just said that.
So sometimes things come out of your mouth, you can't pull that back. The interesting thing is that if you are a cannabis grower or a cannabis consumer, and you're I want some cannabis that is a little bit hoppy. Well, to a hop person or a beer person, you're what the hell?
Yeah.
What kind of hoppy do you want? And I think it's the same thing on the brewing side. We want something that's kind of dank. Okay, well, dank could be in all different kinds of directions from a cannabis perspective, as we found when we created this cannabis lexicon. So what is it? What is the part? Is there a Venn diagram, and is there some overlap where these hops are dank? People say CTZ Cryo is the dank go-to.
Oh, sure, yeah, dank dive and a range of these things.
Yeah, exactly, right. And so is it really cannabis, or is it OG, or is it something else? Or, it'd be interesting to hear from you. And I think one thing that I find really interesting about coming to CBC is that you talk to people and you kind of hear what's going on, and what you guys talk about and what you tell me is kind of inspires what we work on next. So
That's kind of why when you stopped by the brewery last year, we were
exactly. Was to spend a day with Vinnie and your team and just talk about what's going on.
So did you look at any of the science behind the cannabis lexicon that was the different sulfur compounds that we were talking about earlier?
Right. So
it all comes back to sulfur compounds eventually. Thank you, Vinnie.
Yeah, I know. And so
you were going to do it if I did.
Yeah. So one of the challenges with sulfur chemistry is that it's really complex. And it's also kind of difficult from like a chemistry perspective, from an analytical perspective, more difficult than say measuring terpenes. And so when we did the cannabis lexicon, we also did some chemistry on that to try to understand and see if we could make some predictions. And we couldn't, at least with the analytes we were looking at, which were like, if you were to send cannabis to your local testing lab in Portland, this is what they would give you. We also did a bunch of sulfur analysis at OSU as well. And even then, we're not yet, like, we can't point our finger like this compound or these 3 compounds, that's cannabis aroma. So we have kind of an idea there. There's some 3-MBT, like, 3-MBT from Skunky Beer. That's part of it, but it's not, that is not, like 3-MBT in beer smells like skunk. 3-MBT in weed, okay, well, that's not the weed aroma. It's part of it, right? So anyway, it's more to come.
Is that part of the problem? Not problem, but the part of it with all these different sub-sulfur compounds in beer, that there are some that cross over?
Yeah, totally.
There's like a little
exactly.
bit. Because isn't there like 30 different sulfur compounds in hops or whatever? Maybe more.
There's probably way more than that.
So,
we just talk about we heard from Ben on the first half, good sulfur, bad sulfur, not really even good sulfur, bad sulfur. It's called good thiol, bad thiol. Good thiol are the ones that smell like tropical fruit. The bad thiols are the ones that smell like a floor drain or rotting vegetables. They're both thiols. One is like ethane thiol, methane thiol. It's the stinky ones, and then you've got like these 3SH, 3-sulfonyl hexanyl. And the acetate esters, et cetera, all these things that are, the names are so long that we just shorten them to 3SH, 3MP, 4MMP. These guys are the kind of the more pleasant smelling stuff. That's just one like little subset. You have all this other stuff. We talked about, what do you say, DMTS or ETS, like some dimethyl trisulfide. These are sulfides, like H2S, kind of farty smells, but also burnt match smells. These are like, that's another sulfide character. So and then you have SO2, that's kind of more struck match. So there's a whole bunch of sulfur. It's hard to like just generalize sulfur into one category. But there are
Tom,
different
I remember
crossovers.
like at that Hoppy Symposium that we were at, like there was some interesting research that Peter Bertram was sharing where it's not just the existence or the linear level of one of those thiols, but at a certain threshold point, some of those thiols actually change in sensory perception from that pleasant fruity character,
totally.
and then become some of these less desirable characters. And so there was some interesting data that came out there that at some point trying to amp up your thiol content and expression actually worked against you and pushed it too far and into a different kind of perception.
Exactly, yeah. So particularly with thiols, there's a tremendous concentration dependency. So as you go to higher and higher levels, they don't just get, the amplitude doesn't go up, they just move into different space. And I had this example, Daniel Sharp was, we talked about like the aging stuff. So he was starting to play around with the thiol stuff when he was in graduate school. And I remember he made up some like 4MMP standards and took the tip of the pipette tip and just punched it into the garbage can as opposed to taking it out in the lab. I think that was what it was. But anyway, I walked in the lab and it smelled like a fucking zoo, right? It was just like, it was like cat, animal, sweaty. It was just like, wow. And it lasted like that for 3 days. And then, on day 4, it was kind of got into this like, it's kind of getting tropical. And then day 5, day 6, this is the lab, right? This is going day after day. And as the level went down, it just moved into this beautiful kind of tropical, then a little bit grapefruit, and then it finally dissipated. So at really high levels, it was unpleasant. At low levels, it was beautiful. So this is, and we were talking about backstage, like this is my approach. I often take the Bob Ross approach to many things. So more is not better, like less is best. And so that can be
like
the case
we're backstage and I'm talking about just pushing it, and Kelsey's talking about we're just pushing these IPAs like with more and more and more hops.
Always the more is more, sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I just I want to smell it and taste it like
Totally.
by smelling it, and so it's like but as you're hitting us with that, like I don't know how does that correlation take place in a way that can be applied for us brewers?
Well, I think there's several different angles. There's one like on just like raw material efficiency, right? there's like a diminishing returns, or at least a non-linear approach to when you're dry hopping. As you go 1 pound per barrel, okay, you got a certain amount of aroma. 2 pounds per barrel, definitely the aroma goes up. 3 pounds, it goes up. 4 pounds, it's going up. But it's not going up linear. It goes up and it starts to taper off. And at some point, you're just adding more and more and more hops onto something. You're getting incremental bump on that. And so understanding where that point is from like just a raw material efficiency makes sense, right?
Right.
Yeah, you could do 10 pounds per barrel, but it's like, okay, that's kind of like back in the 90s when, the dot-com folks were like just burning money because they were, everything was on fire. But so there's like understanding how much do you need to really get that bump. So that's one part. I think another part is like, this is kind of an American thing, right? It's like we just like loud music, like big cars.
A
like,
little is good, a lot's better.
A lot's better, exactly. I can turn my amplifier up to 11. So it's like, I think that a little bit of restraint in that regard can help, because as you, let's say like with thiolized yeast, right? Or GMO yeast that can really push thiols.
Yeah.
You can make beers really one-dimensional with those.
Yes. Right.
Right? And so that's kind of an example where like, I want the outcome of thiols. Okay, here we go. So it's like, this is thiols and nothing else.
Yep.
And so dialing that back a little bit then gets you into this spot where they get a little more balance. And
There's a pretty fun, Berkeley recently came out with these single bricks of dry yeast for their thiol-driven yeast strains. And it's pretty fun as a brewer to be able to harvest some yeast and then throw in, say, a full pitch of some liquid, or mostly, and then one single brick of this thiol yeast, and then get this expression that you're not jumping into these higher levels that you're talking about where it becomes sewer-like or Captain or a range of turds.
I don't think that the high thiol expression yeast are going to move you into the super mercaptan because you think so?
Oh man, I've been there. Oh yeah.
Oh, okay.
Absolutely.
There you go. Okay.
I'm experience based, but
He's a sulfury boy.
Yeah, he is.
He's a sulfury boy.
The sulfur boy.
My friends say worse. But the Ben, is that Ben laughing in the? Oh my
There you go. Way to go, Ben.
I can hear that laugh. It's endearing. But yeah, I think that the trying to continue to figure out this spot that I think we were talking about backstage for a moment of, as brewers so often we're just we're trying to make delicious, impactful beer that people smell it, including us, and we're stoked, our customers stoked, and everything else.
It's on their pick 6.
And
right? That's what you want, right? At some point. I would imagine that.
We have 3 beers that we, over the last 3 or 4 years, have actually reduced the dry hop load, including Dr. Ron being one of them, and it made the beer better. They cleaned it up. It got rid of some really, like with Dr. Ron, it's 100% New Zealand hops, and it has a lot less of that New Zealand diesel note. Hop growers hate that I'm saying this.
Yeah, well, I
helped them enough with Simcoe.
When you
and other
say
hops,
you reduced it and it made it a better beer, were there other factors that also impacted that, not just the sheer amount of that dry hop?
Yeah, it was for Dr. Ron, it was the New Zealand diesel quality to it. For Happy Hops and Mind Circus, there was this, Happy Hops had this kind of plasticky hop character to it that I had experienced years ago with Pliny the Elder. With Mind Circus, it was a muddy, muddled hop aroma, and we backed off by a significant amount, 0.5 pound per barrel, and it made all 3 of those beers are better beers now for backing off of it. So, so maybe that's the challenge too, is that it doesn't need to be 5 pounds per barrel. Natalie and I and Jamie have a very succinct focus that there's too much bad talk going on in the beer industry, and that yes, there's a lot of breweries having a rough time, but we got to get off this treadmill of speaking about the good stuff or the bad stuff. We got to talk about the good stuff. And one way is to be more profitable, is your business is be more profitable, and it doesn't have to all be 5 pounds per barrel. You'd be shocked at how low Pliny the Elder is dry hop load now between using advanced hop products.
How low?
I mean, it's,
You knew I was going to ask that.
I knew. We're probably only at 2 pounds per barrel.
What?
Yeah. Some of it is using, flowable hops, and that then gave us yield, and we know exactly what the limit is, which is a whole nother podcast that we've talked about doing at some point, but like we know what the limit is for foam, which is something Kelsey and I have been communicating a bunch about. And like,
Wait, what's the limit for foam?
Yeah, you have to wait for the next podcast.
Oh, yeah.
15 to 20% replacement of your hops is our rule at Russian River, but that's another podcast.
We will have that advanced hop
but-
products
but-
episode at some point in the future.
But
Oh, man,
I think it's time to start like thinking about a hoppy beer and efficiency, and how can you be efficient as a brewer to then be more profitable. I mean, we're all business owners up here, and so that's critical. And then in the end, maybe you end up with a cleaner, aromatic tasting beer, to Tom's point, with some of the work that you've done or are doing now.
Those are nice thoughts, but let's look at the other counterfactual to that argument. And I want to ask Kelsey about this one.
Okay.
Because there is the way of reducing your hops and dialing it back because less is more. And then there's also figuring out how to make more, even more.
Yeah.
But also, as Tom talks about, there is this plateau, and you all are actively trying to bust that curve and try to stop that plateau and keep it growing at this kind of linear rate. But figuring out how to do that is also a challenge. Talk about with some of the experimentation you've done there and what has shown some promise for you.
I mean, I've talked about this a bunch, but we've experimented with a lot of using, these advanced hop products in ways that weren't prescribed by the manufacturer, where we're taking, flowables that are supposed to go into the whirlpool and using them in the unitank. And,
Which now they recognize you.
yeah.
I think it's officially the Kelsey McNair technique, or is it the Mr. Hop Food technique?
I don't know.
the North Park style.
But go on.
But I mean,
The first I've ever heard of, by the way, it's impressive.
Okay. So that was something that we, tinkered around with early, and found a way to get this intense, saturation, this more like rich mouthfeel that we could build off of that, on top of a beer that was already pretty heavily dry hopped, and then, breaking up our dry hop additions so that we're getting ideal extraction, using concentrated pellets. But then as we've seen more, things hit the market, whether it be abstracts or hyper boost, we've incorporated those things into our program, and we find that there's the right timing, the right amount, and sometimes these things that are supposed to be, again, used maybe on the cold side in the unitank also can be really great in the whirlpool. So it's just been experimentation, but for me, it's not like, I just want to like cram all this, crazy intensity in your face. I want to do it in a way that's balanced at the end of the day. Like, your experience should not be, oh my gosh, this beer is just chock full of like extract products, downstream things that don't remind me of hops. It's like, that is the threshold for me, is like, I back off when I can find that place for those things and make sure that what ends up in the glass is beer. It's the beer that it's not some foreign, thing that's just an alien sitting in your glass and you're like, what the heck is, it's like, that's not the goal. But it is to drive the intensity level as far as as far as possible.
What are some of the kind of practical implications of that in terms of how you add, where you add, and where that kind of balance between modern products and T90 or concentrated pellets, where that sits, and does that change, from hop variety to hop variety?
I mean, I'd say like the best example is, abstracts and hyperboost are two things that we've used, a decent amount of at this point. And, those to me both have characteristics that are not familiar if they're added too late in process. Things that normally would get scrubbed off, during fermentation or in the kettle, or just given the time for dry hop maturation, to have its chance at getting rid of some of these things that, and I think myrcene is the main one.
The devil.
Well, I mean, it smells. It's like you
Would you
rip
say
open
devil?
a bag of hops,
Yeah, exactly.
and that's what you're smelling. It's like this
Totally.
thing that goes away.
Myrcene is big.
Yeah,
And,
it smells. It's like what hops smell like, and so you add these things too late in the game, and you package that beer, and it's like it could take a month before that, in the package has gotten to a place where it's not, present in a pleasant way. Or it just persists forever. So I think that, and there's something to be said about having this sort of like long staying factor and shelf life considerations. But if you're putting things in the beer that aren't what people know beer to be, and you're kind of locking them in by putting them in at the last step, now you have something that, I don't know, it's not what I want to drink. And so, yeah, I think getting stuff like that in early and allowing it, the time is the best practice that I've found. What do you guys think about that?
I have a question for Tom. So based on that, do you think like myrcene or even sulfur, whatever it is, do you think venting or not, like we were talking on the first segment, can cap that in, can keep it in the beer if the tank is capped? Or is this something for a future student of yours to work on for
It's
2 or
interesting
3
listening to this
years?
discussion, like team cap, team vent.
Because this is what we talked about this when
I
you
know,
visited last
exactly, yeah.
summer, too.
Yeah, I think I'm probably more of a team vent person. I'm just thinking that, it's like from a myrcene perspective, myrcene is like probably the most dominant feature of essential oils, but it's not hop aroma. It's hop aroma, but not hoppy aroma. When you do a hand rub evaluation of hops, you smell a lot of myrcene. You're smelling other stuff, but myrcene is predominant. But you don't find a lot of it in beer because it's just really not soluble. Now you get a really hazy IPA, you get kind of like almost like a hop emulsion. Yeah, there's myrcene there, and when you drink a hazy IPA, you burp hop aroma, and that's myrcene. But it's not the signature aroma of hoppiness in beer. And so things that allow it, well, when you put it in the kettle, it blows off. I think when you try to when you're dry hopping, you're not getting much myrcene in. I talk to people that do like dip hopping, right? And that whole process is kind of about my limited understanding of dip hopping. Myrcene removal. I mean, even the Japanese do some kind of pre-isomerization of hops before they do kettle additions for myrcene removal. And so myrcene is not a bad character. It's just not a character that's signature for hoppiness in beer. It kind of gets in the way.
What would you say is then?
Like the things, and like YCH just talked about survivables. If you think about it in that concept, it's kind of that same thing. Things that will actually stay in beer and persist through the process. So like the thiols are definitely survivable. Those are big impact compounds. Terpene alcohols, linalool, geraniol, these guys are really important. Oxidation products are important. Things other than when you look at a list of like terpenes, the top 3 or 4 are really sort of unimportant.
Whoa.
They're just like filler, if you could kind of think about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's kind of like when you look at the total resin fraction on hops, okay, there's all this stuff in there, but we're really, as brewers, we're really interested in alpha acids because we know that's what's important for bitterness, and we could care less about beta acids and uncharacterized resins. Even though they're there, we don't like, ooh, look how fat these resins are. We know it's alpha acid. Hop aroma is a little more complex, but if you can think of essential oils, not so much as like how much oil is there, but like what's in the oil, that's probably more of the key. And I think we talked about that in the first section, like brewers using technical data to try to make decisions. I think we're moving that direction. We're not there yet, but that's...
What are those oils? And first, I should say, We're going to take some questions here in about 2 or 3 minutes. So if anyone has some questions for the panel, jump up there on the mic and we're going to get to those in a minute or two. But I have actually been having some of this conversation with other brewers, talking about how total oil and thinking about total oil and hops is a kind of a misdirect. And, and what you were saying is exactly that same, that it is not about total oil. It is about the specific amounts of certain oils and what those, may contribute to the beer. So if you were coaching brewers on what is going to have an effect as they are looking at the kind of breakdown that a hop vendor is showing them for specific oil contents, what are some of those things that they should be paying attention to, Tom?
Yeah, so this is going to be an unsatisfying answer, and that it really depends upon the hop variety you're looking at. So this is like, if you look at Scott LaFontaine's doctoral thesis, it was a big part of that, was like chasing what is it that drives hop aroma intensity. And so we did a lot of work in Cascade. This is why Cascade is part of like the old school, like my favorite hop. So we had we had processors and growers send us Cascade samples. We had 30 Cascade samples that ranged from like 0.7 mils per 100 grams to like 2.5 mils per 100 grams. So kind of broad range of oil content, but this is just Cascade only. And there was zero correlation between the oil content and the aroma intensity of the beers that were made with those. So it tells you that oil is not important. Now, if you were going to give me just a blind sample of hops, here's got a 4% oil and here's a 0.5% oil. I'd put money that the 4% oil is more aromatic than the 0.5%. I'm not going to just go on. But within a particular variety, the oil content is not necessarily a fair predictor of hoppiness in beer for these things. Like the things that's in oil, like myrcene and whatnot, are unimportant. So like for Cascade, it was things like geraniol and I think beta pinene might have been something for Centennial. It's specific for the variety in question. So that's the unsatisfying part. I can't tell you, okay, go look at your spec sheets and hunt for these 1 or 2 compounds. That's the key driver. It depends upon how the hop's used and the variety. But total oil as a lever is not, just pump the brakes a little bit on that. Within a variety, like, oh, this is really high oil content. Okay, it may or may not be a high aroma potential.
I don't see anyone. No one has questions out here? Oh, we've got. Okay.
Now they're running.
Hey, Ben, can I get another beer, please? Jamie, 2. One for Jamie.
This is a difficult.
Kelsey, 2.
Yeah.
Ben, are you still there? Ben Edmonds of Breakside Beer. Thank you, Ben. I think he left.
We understand this is a difficult multivariate equation. Evan, we're going to be done soon enough. We can grab a beer when we're done. This is a difficult. In fact, I think we already passed last call. Sorry. A multivariate equation where these things mask and amplify each other, and figuring out that matrix can be challenging. But you know what? The guy right behind you, we had to let him go. Maybe you guys swap some. Let's get his question in first. Yep.
All right. James Bardeen from Farfield Beer Company in Los Angeles. Going back to the previous session, had a quick question about ALDC. I heard Evan talk about ALDC. When do you guys use that in your process? Do you use it in your process? Or do you use GMO yeast to get rid of diacetyl?
No, so super easy for us at this point, but we knock out with 5 grams per barrel into the fermenter. Then in all of our trials, the funniest thing that worked the best, that no one ever probably agrees with me on because the science isn't necessarily back this up, but worked well for us, is we then are adding 5 grams per barrel whenever we go to crash the beer. And so it's the only time that we end up rousing our tanks, is we'll add 5 grams per barrel, and then we will add it to the top of the tank, purge the headspace, and then crash the tank.
We use GMO yeast for Chico anyway. We use Berkeley. But we do use ALDC for our hazy IPA strain and our lager.
For the GMO yeast, are you doing VDK?
Yeah, we still check, and we still pick up. We have failed tests. But we'll just continue to check it. But with our program, it's pretty reliable. We know when it's going to pass, and we just validate.
I'll give you an alternative method here. We cut our ALDC use by like 80%. ALDC is crazy expensive. I think ALDC was invented by the people that made hop creep. But we found that by reducing the pH of our beer at dry hop using food grade phosphoric acid, then our yeast is in a better position to be healthy to reduce the VDK, and we clear VDK in 2-3 days now, and we've reduced our ALDC literally by like 80%. We were spending so much money on ALDC, and so just by focusing on yeast health, you should be able to reduce it. We still use a little bit, but we don't use near as much as we once did.
Yeah, one quick plug to throw in there too is just that when you talk about the GMO yeast thing, that is the diacetyl killer of sorts. One of the benefits of that is if your team forgets the ALDC addition, that really sucks. And so if you have the GMO yeast for that, then you don't have to worry about it. And then you have yeast suppliers like Berkeley that offer free shipping for their yeast too. So it's not too bad of a deal. Some of us get stuck in our ways to a certain point, and then before you know it, you're just Mr. ALDC guy.
Quick question. On the pH, how far down do you go?
It depends how much you dry hop with, so you got to figure that out. But you're going to assume that you're going to drop your pH 0.1 for every pound per barrel you dry hop.
Oh man, I've been meaning to talk about this pH thing at dry hopping, but we'll talk about it later.
Next episode. Got another question?
Yeah, Brett from Girdwood Brewing again. I guess initially I just like to think about, I like the thought of separating dank from OG, especially on 420 here. So
yeah, it's true. I'm with you.
But secondary question was, I forgot that. Sorry.
All right, who's next?
How's it going? Matt Katase, Brew Gentleman out in Braddock. First, I want to say it's hilarious to hear you all talking at regular speed because I haven't listened to an episode not at 1.5 speed. So to hear your voices at normal speed is kind of funny. Vinny, you mentioned kind of doing things on the pilot brewery and testing it, seeing it scale to larger batches. Are you able to do the exact same thing and see that? And then how do you validate when you scale? Because that was one of the things, we have a 3.5 barrel and a 22 barrel system. 7-barrel tanks, 22-barrel tanks, 44-barrel tanks. So it's different sizes, different outcomes. Even on the big side, between the 22 and the 44-barrel tanks, doing similar processes. What are you using to validate scale, the trial scales at the larger size?
Yeah, it's all lab work.
Yeah.
We treat the pilot brewery just like we do our 20-barrel in Santa Rosa as we do our 75-barrel in Windsor. So we technically have 3 breweries.
Yeah.
And the lab pulls samples every day in the pilot brewery just like they do. And so we're pulling all the same information. I've got data for everything. So that's a huge part of it. But that costs money too.
Right.
So.
I guess process-wise though, are you seeing things on the smaller side that then also translate on?
Yeah, if we're talking about if we decide that we are going to jack some CO2 through the bottom of the tank, it just takes more pressure on a 300-barrel tank because it does a 5-barrel tank, and we just figure that out. So yeah, it does transfer. Cool. It absolutely does.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you, guys.
Hey, Brent, I have a question for you. Okay, sorry.
Hi, everyone. You probably won't understand me because I'm from New Zealand. I think...
Who are you?
You introduce yourself. You're a legend. Come on.
No, not at all. I think we've got legends up on the stage. And I think let's turn this podcast upside down and ask Jamie some questions. because
Ooh, Brent, I don't know if we have time for that.
but you know, we all come to this to learn, and the most amazing thing about this industry is we're learning. You know, our farm's 125, 126 years old, but we're always learning of what you guys out here want to understand about hops, about, I don't know anything about yeast or anything at all. You know, if we all come together and share our information, you've got Dr. Tom up there, who's an amazing resource. You've got these guys here with Vinnie, his experience, Evan, his tenacity and incredible different brews, and he loves New Zealand hops, hashtag, well done, Evan. How is it best to get you the information, Jamie? Like for us, for learning, you know, I sit on my tractor and put a podcast on. That's my office. That's how I learn. And for these guys, they're out here brewing and stuff like that. How do we get the information? What's our next podcast? And for all four on the panel there, what's your next podcast you want to see Jamie do?
We love tasting great beer, and I think that we get so many great ideas from tasting beer that you all send to us, because naturally it sparks curiosity, and we want to know, how did you do that? And that's that thing that leads to the next question. And then, you know, how did you accomplish that? You know, then what went into this? And you know, we have so many conversations that go on like this, but all of you do, and all of them do. And so many of, like, even our ideas on this have been driven by email chains that Vinnie has with Ben, and the text chains with Tom, like, you know, and this kind of communication happens. We just simply try to funnel that and share it in a meaningful way so that more brewers can be in on some of that conversation. And that's just what we try to do. But I don't know, what should we do next?
Yeah, Kelsey, what should we do next? I mean,
We'll come up with something.
I mean, I love continuing this, like, year by year, month by month, week by week. I mean, one of the coolest things about working in a brewery, running a brewery, is there's just no lack of lessons. There's no lack of learning, and you know, no matter how good you think Kelsey's beers are or Vinnie's beers are, I think that they're students to beer in ways that we're all always learning these lessons and trying to overcome them. We were talking about them backstage, and it's just fun that no matter what level you're at, you're like, yeah, what are you working on? And it's like, oh man, I'm working on the same thing. Like, how do we overcome that? And so it's fun.
I will just finish this off, because we do need to wrap this up by saying there are challenges in selling beer in the current market. There are definitely some headwinds against beer. We saw another 5-ish% volume decline. I think we run the risk of equating what is happening to the biggest craft brewers that are selling in a mass market to what is happening to craft beer as a whole. There are also many smaller craft brewers who are growing and doing just, you know, like, it is not one story. We need to be nuanced in the way that we tell that story. But one thing is absolutely true. This is the absolute best time in history to be a brewer, to be a beer drinker, to be someone who loves very, very well-made craft beer. The ingredients that brewers have never been better. The information and knowledge that we have about process has never been better. The avenues that we can share those through have never been better. The responsiveness of those producers serving the brewing industry has never, ever been better than it is today. And so despite all of those kinds of challenges on the sales side, we have, like, you know, the first time craft beer went through these challenges in the early 2000s, it was a quality problem. Yep. And Vinnie and other brewers got together and said, hey, we're going to fix this quality problem by helping everyone make better beer. Everyone makes great beer in a general sense now. The floor for wherever we go is so much higher than it once was. We'll figure out where that is. But I swear to you, this is the best time to be a beer drinker in the history of beer. And with that, we've got to bring this to a close. Thank you, Tom, Kelsey, Evan, Vinnie. Thank you, Ben, who's still hanging out there. Guys, we have like 5 more minutes if you want to enter the Orbit giveaway from Encompass. Thank you to Yakima Valley Hops. Thank you to PackTech. Thank you to Triple C for supporting this. We've got about 10 more minutes till we need to clear out. Enter that Encompass competition. We will announce it in about 5 minutes from now, right up here on the stage. Thank you all for joining us for this very first Craft Beer and Brewing podcast live from CBC here at Union Transfer in Philly. Cheers to all of you all. This podcast has been brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those who love to make and drink great beer. To learn more or to subscribe, visit beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew.